Diana Sanchez, the Director of Communications here at National Marriage Week. National Marriage Week launches every February 7th through the 14th, and it's a fun time of events all across our nation. But it's also a movement that is growing all year long, when we're ministry leaders, churches, those in our government, and even us as couples are coming together to stand up and say we value our marriages. Our families and our country can flourish when the marriages within our homes are strong and healthy. So, we are so glad that you wanted to join us this evening and that you want to be intentional about growing individually and in your marriage. Each of our panelists is freely giving of their time to be here for you this evening to serve you in your marriage. Whether your marriage is struggling or in a really good spot, we are here to help arm you with the skills to make it even better. We are cheering you on. So let's get started.
Hello, viewers. I'm so happy you've joined our National Marriage Week panel discussion tonight. I'm Amy Morgan, your host for this evening. Our panel of experts has decades of experience helping people with all aspects of marriage, including the transition from couple to family. And they've lived the experience. All told, they can count 21 children among their families. I'm so delighted to introduce you to our distinguished guests. Karen Stubbs is a speaker, host of Wire Talk podcast, and author of several books. Karen founded Birds on a Wire, a ministry created to equip mothers with practical and biblical truth so they can parent with confidence. She's passionate about encouraging moms for the toughest job they will ever have, raising their children. Rob Rienow is the founder of Visionary Family Ministries. He serves as an international conference speaker, has a podcast, and is the author of several books. His most important ministry, however, is loving his wife, Amy, and partnering with her to help their 7 children and grandchildren follow Jesus. Dr. Ray Guarendi is a clinical psychologist, author, professional speaker, and national radio and television host. He's written books including You Are a Better Parent Than You Think and Taught by 10, a psychologist's father learns from his 10 children. His radio show, The Doctor Is In, can be heard on more than 440 stations and Sirius XM Channel 130. His EWTN television series, Living Right with Dr. Ray, is aired in 140 countries. Dr. Ray has given more than 3,000 talks on various topics, including parenting, marriage, family, and the Catholic faith. Thank you all so much for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much.
Parenthood can be a joyful, magical time, but nothing shifts the marriage relationship quite like it. A couple now has to consider and work harder for private time together and to overcome stressors like tiredness and financial strain. Rob, your kids range in age, so you're enjoying your first grands while still raising children in your home. You have a deep belief in the value children bring to the family. Will you set the stage for us?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for this whole week and all the love and leadership that you've put in. Yeah, Amy and I just celebrated, my wife Amy just celebrated 30 years of marriage together. We've got 7 children, 4 boys and 3 girls. They range from 27 down to 11. We have 3 married and off the payroll, 3 grandchildren. And so, as you just said, we've still got a 5th grader at home and then grandchildren all at the same time. And I love the conversation that we're going to have tonight about how do children impact the marriage relationship. And the first thing that we need to say, like from the rooftops, is that children are a blessing and a joy. Psalm 127 says, "Behold, children are a heritage from the Lord, the fruit of the womb, a reward." Verse 5, "Blessed is the man, blessed is the person whose quiver is full of them." And that is just not what our culture is telling young people today. Culture tells them that kids are a burden, kids are expensive, you should wait, you should stop. There are spiritual reasons, I think, for this, like gospel reasons. One of the themes in the Bible is how much Satan hates children, how much he hates marriage and hates family, hates one generation, leading another generation to follow Jesus. When we talk to young couples, and by the way, the things that I'm going to share with you today about Amy's and my heart on this subject is not the way I thought when we got married. I thought a whole lot more like the message of the world than the things we're going to talk about tonight. But one illustration that I think might help. We've all gone to the movies. Maybe there's a movie that comes out that you've been looking forward to for a long time. And you sit down with your popcorn and you drink, and there's a preview that comes on. And you're like, oh, that preview looks pretty good. And then they show another preview and like, oh, I don't want to see that. And another preview, and that's okay. And then sometimes it's 4 previews, 5 previews, 6 previews. And the previews are fine, but at some point you get like, well, when is the movie going to come? When is the feature presentation going to come? And I think of those early years of marriage before God blesses a couple with children. And that can be foster children, adoptive children, biological children. But before those children come, those are the years that are kind of like the previews. They're fine. They're good. But when God blesses a couple with children, it is now the feature presentation. The number one mission of their life as a couple the Lord has now brought that immortal soul into their care, and their great mission as parents begins.
Oh, I love that. Karen, your ministry speaks to mom in particular to help them be more confident parents. As the wife of a Top Gun Navy pilot, you know firsthand the challenges adding a new person to the household can bring, especially when a spouse might be away often.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yes. We have 4 children. And whenever we were having our children, we lived far away from family and friends. And just right after we had our first, Greg was selected for Top Gun. And he had to leave to go do that and left me alone with the newborn baby and all the challenges there. So I just had to hit the ground running and ask God for a lot of wisdom and, to help guide me, because I really didn't have anyone else. So I really did learn how to lean into the Lord from the very beginning, because, I always thought we would do it together. And just the series of events, he was gone almost her whole first year of life. And because the Gulf War happened, he went off to that. So it was just a lot of trial and error. So the Lord and I really bonded during that season. And I do think just having children, you don't really have never talked about, maybe the in-laws and how it's going to affect different parts of that family dynamic. You're trying to establish your core family. And then you, of course, have your parents and your husband's parents, and you want to listen to everyone and respect everyone and all of that. It's just challenging. So children are a blessing. I agree 100% with Rob, but it also brings a lot of new challenges to the marriage.
Well, sure. Dr. Ray, as a psychologist, you've seen how our culture encourages parents to second guess themselves and lose authority. You even wrote a book with the title, "You Are a Better Parent Than You Think." I love that. Tell us about that. What happens when parents overthink things?
Last 30, 40 years, the psychologists have swarmed parenting. We have made, especially the good parents, become unsure of themselves, tentative, resolute only in small situations. And what has happened is that because of all the psychological correctness that is bombarding parents, they become uncertain. And one of the things you can't be if you're trying to raise God-seeking kids in this culture is uncertain. A parent will say to me, "How do I know I'm right?" Well, first of all, parents didn't used to ask that question. For better or for worse, they didn't ask that question. I say, well, you're right most of the time because you're the parent. You make the decision. TV, no TV. Curfew, when? Allowance, what? Video games, where? That's your decision with your family's morals. You don't go out and take a poll of 150 experts to try to find out what you properly are allowed to do. Our federal panelists have a lot of kids. And I got to believe, especially Bob, Bob, you started getting grief. Up around kid number 3 or 4, people started saying, "You know how this is happening? Don't you have television?" You know what I said when people looked at us with our 10 kids under 12? Our kids are all adopted, by the way. So it was kind of interesting because I have 3 white, 2 Hispanic, 2 biracial, 3 black. We'd go out in the store and people would look. They'd look at my wife. They'd look at me. And I could hear them thinking, "I don't think this major dork knows those aren't all his kids." And I said, "Well, I suspect her, but I can't catch her." So I told people like Bob, and When somebody says, "Are these all your children?"
Yes.
You just say, "Of course not. The oldest is at home with the triplets."
I love that. Oh, well, Rob, you and Amy had really prioritized your kids and doing things. And, we talked about some of those struggle points, right? About, maybe it's the new baby, but you guys found that you weathered those things pretty well. You found a different area where some conflict came in your marriage. It's pertaining to parenting. Can you tell us a little bit about your story and how that played out?
Sure. I want to say that we hit some crisis points both at the 10-year mark and the 20-year mark. At the 10-year mark, it was really less a marriage crisis, but more of a Rob crisis. I was a youth pastor for the first 10 years of our marriage. And as a youth pastor, I was investing myself in other people's children spiritually, praying with other people's children, reading the Bible with other people's children. It was a wonderful time of ministry. But the problem was I wasn't doing any of those things with my own children. I was a spiritual leader at church, and I was totally passive spiritually in my house. So that was 10 years in. God had to bring me to this place of repentance and brokenness, and turned my heart to the ministry of my children. And Amy and I then pressed in more to this Christian mission of parenting. But then at the 20-year mark, we began to see some strains in our marriage. And I would just say more distance, more coldness. And as we began to diagnose it, what we saw was that Amy and I were really good, committed to parenting. And we were also very committed to our ministry at church and then Visionary Family Ministries. It was easy for us. Let me put it this way. It was easy for us to invest in the kids, easy for us to invest in ministry, but we were not continuing to invest in our marriage. We weren't continuing to invest in those date nights and time together and time away because we were giving everything to the kids and to the ministry. So we really had to double down at that 20-year mark. There are some of these marriage books that are like, if you get through 7 years, well, then you're good to go. We've lost track of the number of friends that have gotten divorced in their 20 to 30 year of marriage range, because I think this happens. There's so much emphasis on raising the kids that the marriage tank runs dry. So we had to double down on date nights, double down on overnights, double down on prayer. We'll talk more about that later. And now at 30, praise God, I think we're in a stronger place.
I love that we talked about, because we kind of started our conversation, asserting the importance of children and raising them right. And I think we all agree. I mean, I know I strove, my husband and I really wanted to do that for our boys too. But there is that transition click. They can try to cause a wedge. Karen, I know you mentioned the teen years. Let's talk about that, because parents, we have to be that united front, right?
Absolutely. Well, teenagers, you got all those extra hormones raging and all that, and they want to do what they want to do. So you really do have to stand together as a couple and just be like, all right, this is your curfew and we are together on this. Because what we noticed was, if they would come to me and ask me a question and I said no, and then I didn't have a conversation with Greg, like I told him no, but they'd go to Greg and he'd be like, yeah, you can do that. And I'm like, no, I said no. And he goes, oh, okay, I didn't know that. So he'd tell the kids like, hey, mom said no, so I'm standing by mom. And that really helped me, especially he's an airline pilot. So it helped me when he'd come back in town. We didn't always have a chance to tell each other exactly what was going on. So that really, I always knew he had my back, and that makes a world of difference. And I believe strongly that when kids see that the parents are united and they're going to stand together, it gives them security, whether they want to admit it or not in those teen years. The teen years are a ton of fun, but parents have to be strong and committed in what they believe. I agree with Ray, what he was saying, that we have to be confident in our parenting.
Well, Dr. Ray, talk about that, about how, because you have some great strategies in all your work advising people on the radio and on TV. You have some really great words of wisdom for couples on how to do that.
The united front is an ideal. Unfortunately, it's not a reality. And the only reason it's not a reality is because we're different people. We have different temperaments. We have different personalities. One talks more than acts. One doesn't like the discipline. One sets higher standards. One is nervous about the higher standards. So to the degree Here's a rule that worked really well for us in our home. The parent who disciplines or sets the standard rules. Small example. I come home, my wife's frustrated, and I'm grateful that she's not frustrated that I did something wrong while I was gone. So I find out one of the kids did something, and I was going to take him to basketball. And she said, no, I'm sending him to bed. Well, that's her rule. I wanted to take him to basketball. She made the rule. If, for example, they're sitting at the table. Now, I personally think as a father, it's a talent to be able to burp the alphabet. So if one of my boys starts to burp the alphabet and goes all the way to L without taking a break, I think that's a talent. My wife doesn't. So if she says, you're out of the table, she rules. The reason this works for most parents is because the vast majority of parents nowadays are not strict enough. They're loving enough, but they're not strict enough. And they don't stand strong enough. I'll give you just a tiny example. And Rob and Karen know this. If your child is 13 and does not have a smartphone, you are about in 1%.
Wow.
Do you realize the strength you have to have as a parent to go against 99% of other parents, many of whom your kids throw into your face? Well, mom, you know, she's a daily mass goer, and she always just does that. And her kids have smartphones. If you don't have that kind of strength as a spouse, you'll yield. So most parents can allow the stricter parent to rule, and it won't be overbearing, not in a home of love.
Well, and you talked about that, about having house rules, and that way you don't have to go over things over and over again. You make one decision and then it sticks.
Most kids misbehave along repetitive lines. Little kids, bedtime, bad times, chore shirking, homework hassles, meal ordeals, temper tempest, sibling quibbling. All this stuff is routine. Every once in a while, you get something big thrown in there. But for the most part, snotty talk, back looks, maybe a little disrespect. What is your house rule? That'll bring parents together, because if you can negotiate, okay, he's 14. Rolling of the eyes is going to get him a 300-word handwritten essay of apology each and every single time. Do you agree, Mom? Yes, I agree. Okay, that's our rule. Then you don't have to mess around every time with, well, I don't know, how high did he roll his eyes? Well, was it only one eye that he rolled? I don't think it was both eyes. Do you think it was, well, you know, I think he was frustrated and upset, and he gets that way when he's tired. No, there's the rule. Our Lord runs the whole world in 10 rules. I don't know how many we need to run a house.
I love it. I love it. I love that idea of having the rules and the authority. Rob, you talked about too, standing as a team with that extended family relationship. Let's talk about that, because you can be all together on your own team, and then grandma comes over and all of a sudden the house rule just went out the window.
Well, first of all, I'm concerned Dr. Ray had a webcam today in my home.
They put it there, Rob, man. I'm sorry, buddy.
As my wife was trying to help me and encourage me to be a little firmer and a little bit more corrective in an area where she was feeling lonely, right? Feeling like she's always the heavy. I think the subject matter was my daughter in her bathroom or something like that. So I know I'm a panelist here. I'm supposed to be sharing things, but I'm probably more of a recipient. So Ray, thank you for the reminder and the encouragement there. That helped me. But okay, Amy, you wanted to talk about just extended family relationships. When a couple gets married, their definition of family changes. So prior to me marrying my wife, if someone were to say, Rob, how's your family? I would have said, well, my parents are doing this, my siblings are doing that. After getting married, Rob, how's your family? I tell them about my wife. And if I have children, my children. My parents and my siblings are my extended family now. And that's part of the leave and cleave and become one that God talks about as the pattern or process of marriage in Genesis chapter 2. I think it's really helpful for every young couple to talk about and write down even 2 lists. I think it's best to do this during engagement, but if you haven't done it during engagement, you can really do it at any time. But 2 lists. One list being, what are some things that we as husband and wife in the homes that we grew up in, what are some things that we want to repeat? We want to do it just like we had it when we were growing up, and you share those lists with each other. And each spouse should also clearly identify, here are some things I want to do differently. Here are ways I want to be different than my parents, character-wise, because none of us were raised by Jesus, right? We all had parents with a mixed bag of virtues. Here are some things I want to do differently in my marriage than I saw. Here are some things that I want to do differently in my parenting. Now, on that second list, there's a couple critical things that I think couples need to do, because some of the things on the list of I want to do differently are actually connected to some hurt from childhood. And so we encourage couples to walk through that list together in prayer, choosing to forgive their parents and grandparents for whatever areas they may have dropped the ball or done some things that were very hurtful, choosing to forgive them. But then, in addition to that, sometimes if you are going to blaze a new trail and you're going to parent differently or handle your money differently, sometimes it even requires, like you said, Amy, a conversation with grandma when she visits. Grandma, I know that when you raised my mom and, when you had me as a little child, you did A, B, and C. But we've made the choice to do X, Y, and Z. And we love you and we want to honor you, but we ask that you would honor our authority as parents here, because we're going to be proceeding down this path. And that takes a lot of courage to be direct, but you can do it that way. You can completely forgive parents and grandparents who drop the ball in different areas, and you can be direct about it. And you can even have boundaries up. I know we're not going there tonight, but sometimes if you've got really toxic or unhealthy relationships with parents and grandparents, one of the saddest things is when you have to sort of like limit your child's exposure to your own family. That's a super sad situation, but sometimes it's necessary. It doesn't mean you haven't forgiven them. It just means that you're needing to set some boundaries for the health of your family.
Yeah. And Karen, you speak with your husband, Greg. You have a curriculum called Parenting Together from Preschool to Prom. And one of the things that you share in that I really liked was believing the best about your spouse. Could you share a little bit about that?
Yeah. Well, we started sort of taking on that idea years ago. We've been married 38 years. And I don't know, after you've been married a little while, it's just easy to you'll ask your husband a question or he'll ask me and just sort of, I know what you're going to say, so I'm not even going to ask you, and that's not true, because everybody evolves and changes and all that. So we sort of came together years ago and made a pact like, all right, I'm going to choose to believe the best in you instead of the worst. And if I think it's going to be negative or whatever, I'm just going to come to you and I'm going to say, hey, I believe in you. I know you're a kind person and you're loving. This is the way I felt whenever you said that, but I'm sure that wasn't your intention. Yeah. And 9 times out of 10, he's like, it really wasn't my intention. Every now and then he's like, yep, that's what I meant. But most of the time, he's like, I didn't mean to say it that way. I was in a hurry and I was running out the door and I was sort of short with you and I'm sorry. And that's really saved a lot of arguments, just believing the best in your spouse. And, because Greg travels so much and I was always holding the fort down at home and I would always think my job was the hardest. He flies for FedEx, so he flies in the middle of the night, and he thought his job was pretty hard, staying awake and flying the big airplane. And I finally just realized, we both have hard jobs, and that's okay. We are both exclusively have hard jobs, and I don't need to take it out on him anymore saying my job's harder, because he has a hard job too.
Oh, I love that. And I know too, when we're talking about that pulling together, believing the best, Dr. Ray, you had mentioned something that I just thought was so helpful about when somebody thinks they're being helped instead of criticized. Could you explain that concept? Because when you and I talked about it before, that was one of those aha moments for me.
Well, I'd like to, but I want to piggyback on something that Rob said.
Yeah.
Rob, your example touches upon something I hear from a lot of wives. that they are the authorities in their home. They set the limits, they set the rules. And old Disney dad over there, Mr. Good Time, Mr. Easy Going, Mr. Honey, I was that way when I was a kid, and I think I turned out pretty good. And the women are thinking, let's gather the relatives and vote. I tell the guys, I hear the women saying they want to be protected. The next time you hear a child and a mother going at it, don't sit in the Barca lounge. You're thinking, you know, I close my eyes. I can't tell which one of them's the 11-year-old. Get in there and protect that woman. That's not just your mother you're talking to that way. That's my wife. You go sit down. I'm going to see what she wants me to do about this. Okay, wait a minute. You got to get it in writing first. You can't just jump in and protect. And then I'm going to do more. And I tell the guys, you can't know how much the women feel warm after something like that. I used to give my boys a couple bucks. I say, go down and give your mother grief. I'll be right down. So then she'd give me a kiss, you know, after I came in and protected her. But to get to yours a second here now, Amy. Help versus criticism. I got a new book coming out. It's called How to Get Along with Almost Everybody. And I said the word constructive in criticism can mislead, because all too often constructive means I'm going to tell you how I think you need to change. Okay. So to be helpful, you got to know the relationship. There's a lot of relationships you can't give any kind of feedback. Unfortunately, you just have to shut up. But a relationship where you got a decent one, you can say, is he frustrating you? You know, talking about, say, the 12-year-old. Is he frustrating you? Yes, he frustrates me constantly. What do you do? Well, I tell him I'm not going to put up with that. Okay. So what do you do? Well, he knows I won't tolerate that. Okay. So what do you do? In other words, to help somebody out, you get inside their head. I'm a shrink. People come into my office and say all kinds of rot gut, nasty stuff. And you know what I have to do? I have to sit and listen. I can't say, what are you, some kind of nutcase? What are you crazy? They'd walk out.
They might be.
Get in their head. So if you leave your wife and those 4 children, how do you think the kids will react? Oh, my 19-year-old daughter's already not talking to me. She said I broke up our family. So you get inside somebody's head is the best way to help them. You don't just simply dispute them. You start doing that, they dig their heels in, they get defensive.
I love that. That is so helpful. Well, I know we all talked about date nights, and you all agree that a date night is so important for couples to reconnect, and that especially an overnight every now and then, just to rest and to reflect. And it's not just 2 hours here or there, even if the childcare arrangements are difficult, they're worth the effort. Rob, you and Amy, like you said, you really doubled down on that. You really had to make some focus. Talk about what worked for you.
Yeah. Amy and I are wired up pretty differently when it comes to love languages. And we're wired up differently on this whole issue of time and how much time it takes to feel connected. I am more comfortable with just short amount of time in general. Like when I'm at something, I'm looking for it to get done so that I can go on to the next thing. So if Amy and I take a 15-minute walk, I feel pretty connected with her. Doesn't hardly do a thing for her feeling connected with me. The way she's wired, she just needs more time. And Amy also, there's that old analogy of the canary in the coal mine, right? The miners would go down deep into the earth, and I guess they'd bring, I think it's true, I don't think it's just a made up sermon illustration by some pastor, but they bring a canary down there, a bird down there, and the bird would be very sensitive to the oxygen level in the mine. And if the bird died, that was the sign that the air was bad and all the people had to get out. Well, Amy is our canary in the coal mine for our marriage. When she is like sucking for oxygen, she feels it first. She feels us drifting apart before I do. So it's just reminds me I have to be proactive about scheduling time with her before I feel distant from her because my sensitivity just isn't wired up right. I appreciated my daughter the other night. I was teaching a marriage conference, and my daughter was with me running the book table, and she's like, "What are you and mom doing for Valentine's Day?" I said, "Well, we're going out for dinner this week, and then we're going to do an overnight in a couple of weeks." She's like, "You're doing two things?" I'm like, "Yeah, I gotta do double because your mom is going to really benefit from this. And it's going to meet this love language that she has." Another really quick one. A lot of couples don't go to bed at the same time. Yeah. And I do understand there are logistic reasons. One of them's working the night shift. Some of them have just different rhythms, morning person, night person. But we really encourage couples to do everything you can to get your schedules as aligned as possible so that at the very least you end your day with those last few moments before bed together.
I love that. That's such a good watchword. And Dr. Ray, you talked a lot too about that when you're doing things together, that kindness and that social entropy. Can we talk about that? You've had so much experience dealing with that.
My wife and I did the date nights, Tuesdays and Fridays. She went out Tuesday, I went out Friday. It worked pretty good, there for a while. There was an interesting study done about date nights. They work better if during the week the spouses treat each other fairly well. Yeah. If there is friction or critique or scolding or pettiness or peevishness, the date nights don't work as well. They seem to pile on top of an attitude of
Ray's got his video camera on my date nights now.
Hey Rob, your wife called me, man. I'm sorry. She called me. She says, "Here's the things I want you to
out
add."
of here.
Okay. But it's interesting on this whole idea of time together. Rob, he makes a great point. What exactly is it? How much is what it is? As a spouse, here's what you really want your spouse to be able to say. I think this is the elite of a good marriage. You want your spouse to say, "My spouse treats me better than they treat anybody else." You don't want your spouse to say, "Well, I just kind of wish," and Rob was touching into this a little bit. I wish that I would get some of the attention that the people at church get. I wish I had a little bit of that, or, she's the nicest guy. Karen is just a wonderful person at work. Everybody loves her. But I'll tell you what, she comes home. Where'd that person go? Yeah. You want to have your spouse tell other people, "Yeah, he is a joy to live with," or "he is a gem to live with." You don't want to have to pull out your phone and go, "Is this the guy right here that you're talking about? Look familiar?"
I love it. Karen, you were talking about some examples of things that you like to do on your date nights, and you and your husband kind of have some different interests. As you could imagine, a Top Gun pilot might be a little bit of a danger seeker. Tell us about that.
Well, I was telling you that whenever we go on vacations or whatever, he's a big scuba diver and he loves it. And he's like, "Do you want to scuba with me?" And I'm like, "No, I do not. But I want to go on the vacation." So I'm happy to sit at the resort, read my book, go get a massage, and then listen to all of his diving experience, look at all of his GoPro videos that he's got going on and all that. Like, I'm very supportive. I just don't want to go under the water with him. And that's okay. I think that can be a healthy marriage. We sort of alluded to it. We're all different. And I don't want to go under the water. That's not exciting to me at all. It's very unnatural. So, but I'm happy for him to go do it. And I celebrate that and let me stay back and read my book and be happy as well. So.
Yeah, my wife won't go cliff diving with me at all.
I don't blame her. I wouldn't either.
No. Well, you talk about that of opposites attracting, and you all kind of alluded to the love languages, but you talk about that and how you had to I think you had another study that you and Greg did that kind of explored your differences, and then you had a really good strategy that you worked out after that. Could you share that with, because I really liked your wow, not how strategy.
Oh, yeah. Well, Greg and I are opposites on just about everything. The love languages, the temperaments, every test you can take. Myers-Briggs, Enneagram. We are the opposite on all of it. And so it's been, we've had to learn how to figure it all out over the years. And I'm a dreamer and he's not a dreamer. And so used to, if I'd say, oh, what if we did this, this, and this for the house? Or what if the kids, we all went this vacation? He'd just sit there and go, how are we going to do that? That's not going to work. And that would just deflate me. So a mentor of ours told us years ago, Greg, whenever Karen's sharing her dreams with you, you need to just sit there and say, wow. That's all you need to say is wow, not how, but wow. Because that's 9 times out of 10, she just wants to dream with you and she wants you to hear what's going on in her heart. And they may never come true, but you just need to say, wow. Forget about it.
Not wow, are you kidding?
Yeah, no.
What's that, huh? Okay.
It's just such a little simple thing,
It's
right?
just
That it makes such a difference in the way you relate to each other.
That's a good one. That's a good one, Karen, because I gotta start saying that. I keep saying, get out. So I gotta start saying that's a good idea.
I think there's one of the new commercials is like, whoa. So I'm not sure if whoa is quite as good as wow.
That's right. It's helped us, I'll tell you that.
Oh, and then Robbie, you had an idea for something that meant a lot to Amy, right? For the way that really fed into her love languages.
Yeah, I can relate to having opposite love languages. So mine are words and touch. So if Amy will give me a hug and tell me she loves me, I am good to go. I don't need any acts of service. I really don't even need time at all. I mean, I enjoy it, but those are the two things that float my boat. And actually, it was interesting. I mentioned as I was just doing my counseling session with Ray a moment ago.
Hey, no charge there, Robbie.
Thank you. After this conflict Amy and I had this afternoon, she it wrapped up fine, but she wasn't like thrilled. Okay. Cause it was a difficult conversation, but she made a choice to come over and give me a hug after we talked. And we've been married 30 years. I knew it was not a hug overflowing with joy. It was like a choice she was making to show me she loved me with a hug. And it meant a lot to me, even though I knew it was just a choice that she was making. It really did mean a lot. So her love languages are time and gifts. We already talked about the time one a little bit. On the gifts one, so husbands, if you are married to a woman whose love language is gifts, I think it might be, I'm not trying to toot my own horn, but I think that I invented something. Now, I'm sure I didn't. I'm sure there's nothing new under the sun, but I'm going to take credit for it regardless. All right. And you can callously plagiarize this idea from me. So what I started to do is on every child's birthday, I gave my wife a birthing day gift.
I like that.
That
I
you
like that a lot, Rob.
I know I got 7 of them a year now. I got to do, but it's, my wife did an amazing thing that day, right? By the grace of God and bringing this baby into the world. And sometimes it's a little something. Now I am able, let's say I want to buy a bigger something, maybe $100, $200 thing. I can say, hey, this is your next 3 birthing days, like strung together. And she's also super sweet. Like I've missed sometimes because they come like fast and furious. She's never, where's my birthing day? She doesn't think like that at all. But so guys, if you're married to a woman whose love language is gifts and you've got children, the little birthing day, I give her, there's a little picture with the child and the little gift. And Amy loves it.
And I think if you had adopted children, you could do you probably don't call it a gotcha day. Do you, Dr.
No, we call
Ray?
it leaving the house day. As soon as they're gone, we have a big party and then we go and take their bedroom and remodel it into a workout room. It usually takes a day or two.
You got a lot of workout rooms in your house then.
Can I throw a curveball into love languages?
Sure.
Christians, I believe, could put a lot of effort into loving in the language their spouse wants. However, I don't know how much we should demand strongly that you love us in the way we want. If my wife says that I'm going to take care of the kids and she does a lot of things that in her temperament or her love way is not quite mine, okay, And it would be nice if we got that. But I don't want to frustrate myself as a Christian by saying, I know you love me, but you're doing it your way. You're not doing it my way. So I think the love language is great as long as it's gone out. But when it starts to come this way, because I do a lot of marriage counseling. That's why I've got the twitch. Okay. And what happens is if someone says, but I love you, the spouse says, but you don't love me in the way I want to be loved. That's dangerous. And Christians should be real careful about that one.
Yeah. Well, and you talk about it's what we think someone's thinking about us, that it's not so much always just that demand or that thing. Share a little bit more about that.
The number one thing that can really cause friction in communication is take it personal. Take it personal. My wife says, my mother's coming over and she's going to babysit. Well, honey, I can babysit. I'm not incompetent. I mean, do they need fed? When do they need fed? I don't know. What's their names? Just tell me the names and I'll feed them. Well, I got all kind of flustered because I'm thinking, hey, come on, I'm dad here. And my wife's motive was not to say, Ray, I just don't trust you with the kids. Her motive was, I'm giving you some time to write. And I found that out later. So I misread her motive and I took it personal. It's real easy to misread motives and take things personal in a marriage. It happens all the time. And I tell folks, you hold off, because as a shrink, I can see somebody for 5 hours and still miss their motives. So it's real easy for a moment to miss a motive and to take it personal.
Oh, that's really important. And then I know, Rob, you mentioned it a little bit at the beginning, but that cornerstone, I think you all agree, the cornerstone of a marriage too, a Christian marriage, would be that prayer. And that was something that you really incorporated as you were doubling down on the date nights and you guys were watching your language. That was something. Can you share? You had a really great way of how you encouraged couples to pray together, because sometimes that can be so hard.
Yeah, well, it's part of our story and our testimony. So as I shared earlier, first 10 years of our married life, I wasn't doing anything to provide any spiritual leadership or spiritual care for my family. And Amy and I didn't pray together for about 13 years. We prayed before we ate, and we would pray if there was a crisis, but literally no marriage prayer together, no like spiritual care from me. Even like she would be going through a hard time or a difficulty. Honey, let me pray for you. I had such a spiritual neglect of my wife. And as the Lord did a work in my heart and turned my heart to her and hers to mine, that changed. We started praying together every night before bed, just a minute or two. And so for the last 17 years, we've prayed together every night. And I'm not tooting my own horn. I've got 13 years without prayer. I've got 17 years with prayer. So I'm just like +4, like I'm just above sea level, digging out of a lot of prayerless years. But that few moments of prayer, sometimes she prays, sometimes I pray. The few moments of prayer has been absolutely transformative for us. And the reason why, I think you mentioned that it's a struggle and it's awkward, even for a husband and wife who are Christians. The reason why it's awkward is because of the spiritual attack that comes against a couple when they want to pray. Satan and the demons just can't afford to have a husband and wife go to God with humble hearts and ask for his help. Because if you go to God and ask for his help, he's going to help you. That's what God does. When we ask for help, he gives us his spirit and helps us. The enemy wants us just working in our good intentions and our willpower. And the other area of prayer that Amy and I have had to grow in is praying in the midst of conflict. So we're having a fight, right? About Lord knows what, round and around and around, saying the same thing over and over again. And one of us says, I think we should pray. And oh, it's awful. It's just because that we're angry. The walls of our heart are up. And to pray together, you have to lower those walls. So we go over, we like hold hands. It's like I'm holding a cold, dead fish. And one of us says, Lord, help us. And Holy Spirit, I've lost track of how many times this has happened. The Holy Spirit rushes in, softens my heart toward her, softens her heart toward me. I've been saying you for the last half an hour. And now I'm like, oh, me. And she's doing the same thing in reverse. Again, so recognizing that the biggest barrier to this simple prayer time as husband and wife is the spiritual attack coming against you. Would definitely encourage husbands to be the one to say, honey, I think we need to start praying together. And again, you can do it in 5 seconds. God, thank you for our family. Please help our marriage. Amen. 5 seconds of prayer once a day like that is better than 13 years of no prayer like me and Amy did.
Well, that sure makes it sound easy. We can all do that grab hands and do that. And just those little things. Karen, you're talking too about the empty nest years, and you've got your kids, but you want to get on the same page because when the kids are gone, your spouse is going to be there. Tell us a little bit about your thoughts there.
Oh, I was just saying that I just always think we need to look at our marriage like a bank account. Like, you need to invest more than invest or deposit more than you withdraw. Because a lot of times, especially for the moms, we pour everything into our children. And then whenever they leave the house to go to college or go to work or whatever, we're lost when they're gone, when the last child is left and a mom is left in that house by herself. Even if she's a working mom, she has devoted her whole life to, the care of those kids, and it can be a real loss. But if she has invested and deposited in her marriage throughout the years, then she can look to her husband and he can really help fill that gap for her. I think men see that we are struggling in that area. They don't feel it the way we do. But, Greg was very thoughtful in that whenever all the kids left, and he's like, all right, you and I go do some fun things. We've put all that on hold. Let's go do a few fun trips. And that was really good, because I just always encourage moms anyways, that your children are going to leave the house, and that's a good thing. You want them to. You don't want a 40-year-old child living in your basement, living off of you. That's not good. But your spouse is going to be there, and you want to make sure that whenever that last child leaves, that you still have a very strong marriage and you like him, not just love him, but you like him.
And that he likes you.
That's right. That's right.
Well, Dr. Ray, you have just this vast wealth of experience. What are some other best practices or thoughts that you'd like to share?
I had a regret as a father. Some guy asked me this. He said, what's one of your regrets? And this kind of piggybacks with what Karen and Rob are saying. I used to say my prayers. Now, my wife didn't pray with me because I always prayed in Aramaic while I levitated. And I think that was intimidating for her. You know what I mean? You got Rob not praying for 13 years. You got me praying in Aramaic while I levitated. I used to lay in bed covered up and I'd say my prayers to myself. And I look back on it. And if I had that to do over again, I would kneel beside my bed so my kids could see their old man saying his prayers. Okay, we're Catholic, and we will pray the rosary, and we had 10 kids. That's kind of why we got 10 kids, because there's 10 prayers to each decade, so everybody got a prayer. The problem was I always got lost, and I have 5 boys and 5 estrogen Americans. And what would happen is I'd go, glory be to Dad, it's a Hail Mary. Oh, okay, I knew that. I just wanted to see if you guys were listening. I knew that. I like the idea of prayer. The struggle I have with dealing with folks is that cooperation. It's the ideal situation if both, like Rob there, and he and his wife got together and said, we're going to pray together, or somebody pulled the plug on an argument and said, okay, wait a minute, let's pray, you pagan. Might be a little bit smoother than that. So I like it, but when a spouse won't, right. Got a lot of people I deal with who are spiritually a lot more embracing of the faith than their spouse. They could simply say, well, you know what I want to do? I want to pray for you. Now, you got to be real careful about that, because when you say you're going to pray for somebody who is resistant, they take that as an insult. Like, oh, you think I need prayers, huh? So you got to be real careful on that. But you say, no, I want to pray because I love you. That's why I want to pray for you. What else? I think that if a spouse feels like you got their back, one of the more common complaints I hear, he does not stick up for me with his mother. You know, I've told him this, and we've talked about it over and over again. But yet, if it comes down to it, she'll make some snarky remark about my homeschooling, and he just doesn't say a word. Couldn't he just one time say, Mom, she does a great job at it? So I tell the guys, your spouse got to know you got their back. Here's the other thing. People will say, they'll come into my office, and they'll say, how do I change my spouse? How do I get him to change?
Oh,
There's one way that works better than any other way to get somebody to change. You change yourself first. Very few people will not respond positively to another person being more kind, more forgiving, more charitable, less argumentative, more serving. Unless you live with Satan or his sister, people will respond. They are. Maybe not as much as you want, but they will. Now, that's not easy to do, but it's the most effective thing you can do.
Those are such good thoughts. How about you, Rob? Any other thoughts?
I got a question in our counseling ministry with a couple, and I'm not talking about a couple that's dealing with adultery, abuse, abandonment, some of those massive kind of 911 situations, but just a cold, unhappy marriage. Couples will say, should we stay together just for the kids? And Amy's and my response is 1,000 times yes.
Yes.
There's this passage in Malachi chapter 2. It's an often quoted scripture about marriage. It says God hates divorce. And that was always sort of a sensitive passage for me because my parents got divorced. My mother was my father's fourth wife. My father was my mother's second husband. My father was unfaithful to my mother, resulting in their divorce when I was 15. So, you know, I'd hear a sermon on God hates divorce, and I'd understand that from the standpoint that I sort of lived it. I lived with the pain and the trauma of that. And whether you're 5 or 35, it is traumatic if your parents get divorced. And I think sometimes, at least in the Christian world, there is a zeroing in on Malachi 2:16, God hates divorce, without sort of an adequate exposition of why. And you find the why a couple verses earlier. So you have to back up a little to see the context. So you back up a couple verses, and it says, you know, it says, the Lord is acting as the witness between you and the wife of your youth, because you've broken faith with her, though she's your partner, the wife of your marriage covenant. Has not the Lord made them one? In flesh and spirit, they are his. And why one? The question here is, why is oneness in marriage such a big deal to God? Why is this marriage covenant so important to him? Why one? Well, God answers the question here in this passage. It says, because he's seeking godly offspring. So guard yourself in your spirit. Do not break faith with the wife of your youth. I hate divorce. You know what the big deal with divorce is that Satan uses it to rob faith from children. You want to get a kid to hate God? Best way to get him to hate God is to break up his family. And, you know, I have now seen enough testimonies from 25-year-olds, 35-year-olds. I say, hey, tell me about your parents. They say, I got to be honest with you. My parents, they just really did not have a very good marriage. It wasn't a very happy marriage. I mean, there wasn't abuse. There wasn't abandonment, adultery. It just wasn't a great marriage. But you know what? They honored their vows. And that was such a powerful testimony to me of what it meant to honor your vows. You see, there's like a gospel story there. And listen, I'm not saying, well, we just have a lousy marriage, let's just settle for it and stay together. And you need to fight for oneness. You need to pursue healing and reconciliation. But if the question is, you know, should we stay together just for the kids? Absolutely.
Oh, and I love that you talked about that legacy building, and you also talked about fighting to improve your marriage so that you can pursue a lasting love. That's exactly what we're talking about this National Marriage Week, is to work to not just stay stuck in a bad place, or to
God,
stay, and just to go ahead.
yeah, sorry. God loves to take broken things and put them back together again. It's one of his favorite things to do. And if you're that couple that you've been slogging through this for years and years and years, I would just say God has not brought you this far to abandon you now. Like, there is hope.
That is so important, and I'm so glad that you brought that up. And Karen, I know as you've talked to the mommies of littles or teens, or whether it's the empty nest, there's the theme of connectiveness, the theme of honoring your spouse, and just being there, and looking at the long haul and the bigger picture kind of flows through all of that.
Absolutely. I just think you have to work hard. Marriage is hard, but it's also very rewarding. And you just got to push through whatever challenge you're in, and just keep doing the work to make it better and always get better.
Well, that is such a great motivation to keep connected. Whether you're weathering a new baby or the teen years, children are a blessing from the Lord to your family and will be a legacy. Karen, Dr. Ray, and Rob, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having us.
You.
It's a privilege. Thank you.
And viewers, thank you as well for joining us for National Marriage Week. Stay tuned. We're back every night this week through Valentine's Day. And if you'd like to continue to join us, make sure you sign up for each individual discussion. Find answers to your questions and register at marriageweek.org.